Summer was coming to an end, and the HR department at work finally gave me a well-deserved vacation. I, as a 35-year-old, single and financially not constrained man, decided to spend a month away from work, going to my father in the village to do one of my favorite things there, namely, fishing. My father had been calling me to visit for a long time. His mother died 2 years ago. It is hard for him now there, lonely, but he does not want to leave, although I offered not once. I packed my things, threw everything in the trunk of the car, and at 9 a.m. I was driving along the highway towards my native village. I must say that I had to drive almost all day long, so I always got there by 8 o'clock. The village itself consisted of 50 houses, which by the standards of that region was considered quite a large settlement. I spent all my childhood happily in this place, so the memories were the warmest. As I approached the turnoff to the village, I almost passed it, as the sign was covered with black paint. The local gang had done their best. Every time I came to the village, it always welcomed me with a joyful homogeneity in the street and a huge pandemonium of local children, who were surprised to see an expensive car. However, this time it was different. The streets were half empty, the children were mostly with their parents, and the village was surprisingly quiet, as if everyone had disappeared in an instant. Unsurprised by this, I drove the car to my father's house. Everything looked the same. Even the shed my father had built for me, as a shelter for my games, was still there. I pushed the gate, which my father had never locked, because everyone was his own, and there were no strangers in the village or near him. But the gate was locked. Strange, I thought, but there was nothing to do, so I had to knock on the gate like in the old days. In the house there was a commotion, and then a question. Who is there? Dad, it's me. Andre decided to come after all. Shuffling footsteps sounded somewhere in the yard. The gate opened and my father appeared before me. It seemed that the years went by, and he does not change, all the same strong and stocky man. That's what it means to live on all domestic and breathe clean air. We spent the whole evening at the table, talking about this and that, tasting my father's moonshine. Close to 12 o'clock, we both fell asleep and went to our rooms to sleep. In the morning I had no headache. That's what natural product means. After breakfast I announced that I was going fishing, to which my father only smirked and promised that he would join us a little later. Having agreed on the place where he would find me, I quickly dug worms, gathered my gear and headed for the local lake. I had to walk across the village, but I had done it all my childhood, so it was nothing new. It seemed as if I had just left here yesterday. More than 17 years had passed, and everything was still the same. However, as soon as the note of nostalgia subsided, I noticed again the silence and emptiness. No, certainly not like in cheap horror movies when there is not a sound in the village. My village was definitely alive. There were cows mooing and dogs barking here and there, people talking in the courtyards, but the streets were empty. There were no ubiquitous children, no grandmothers on benches by the houses. Even coming to the lake, I did not see a single vacationer there. No one was swimming. No one was running along the sandy shore. Not even a single fisherman. Yes, if the village hasn't changed outwardly, the spirit of freedom and joy has definitely disappeared, replaced by some tension and expectation. I thought, however, as soon as the first bite occurred, all bad thoughts from my head literally blew away. An hour later came and father, and we have already together began to pull the catch, even began to compete, who will catch more, just like in childhood. However, as soon as the afternoon sun became especially hot, we decided to head home. When the euphoria from fishing had subsided a little, my father and I were just approaching the village. That's when I remembered what surprised me most of all since my arrival. Dad, why are the streets so empty? No children or adults. There are practically no children or adults. At once, my father looked down, mumbled something under his nose and said, "Son, let's talk about it at home in the evening. It's not the right time to talk about it." I nodded perplexedly. The rest of the day went by in household chores and worries, and then the evening came unnoticed. No matter how my father tried to avoid the conversation, I still insisted, so he had no choice but to swear and put a bottle of moonshine on the table to start the story. You see, son, the devilish thing started happening here about 5 years ago. It all started with one woman, a strange old woman who lived on the edge of the village, remember? Evdokia. So one night she disappeared, without a trace. They searched for her, but nothing was found, not even a trace of her. After her, a young boy disappeared, maybe 15 years old. He went fishing in the evening and didn't come back. We all realized at 11 o'clock somewhere, ran to the lake, fishing rods in place. Fish half a bucket, and the guy is nowhere to be found. They shouted, called, looked for him, but they never found him. Since then, people in the village started disappearing in the evenings. We thought it was a maniac and wild animals, but it turned out to be much worse. One night, a local man went out for a smoke in the yard and saw something big creeping slowly along the street. So he shone his flashlight there, but instead of a wild animal, he found a foul thing. A tall, pale creature with long limbs walked along the streets and knocked on the wickets of houses where the light was on. The man almost went gray with fear. In the morning, when the whole village knew about this incident, we all went to Grandmother Agafia. Remember the old woman who lived on the outskirts of the village? She's a kind of witch doctor. She knows a little bit about everything mystical. Agafia listened to us, shook her head, and sighed and said, based on the description, we have a hober. It is a large dead man, constantly thirsty for blood, in search of food. He goes out mainly at dusk, and at dawn climbs back into his grave, dragging with him the corpse of the victim. The grandmother also told how to get rid of such a neighborhood, but not everything. She said to come to her in the morning. She will look in the books during the night to find the grave dug up, and how to kill him in the morning. But when we came in the morning, there was no grandmother, and on the ground there were big footprints. I guess the evil took her. The grandmother lives alone. It's the 2nd year since her husband died. By the time my father finished his story, I was already skeptical, because it all sounded like complete nonsense. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was interest, or maybe it was the degree after drinking moonshine. But I was drawn to go for a walk at night. Not that I was looking for a dead man or anything else. I just wanted to destroy this village legend for myself. My father was already fast asleep, and I went out of the gate and wandered around the village at night. The moon was shining brightly. I didn't need a lantern. After wandering around for half an hour, I didn't find any so-called Mederwiak and went home happy. Already approaching the corner of my street, I saw a silhouette ahead. Apparently, it was a night walker like me, I thought. But the closer the silhouette got, the less it reminded me of a human being. I was beginning to sober up because it looked so creepy. Because the lampposts in the village were 25 meters apart, the silhouette remained in shadow, but I clearly understood that it was clearly not a man. It was too big, and it moved as if on all fours. The alcoholic spell had worn off completely when it came into the light. It stood about 20 meters away from me, but that was enough for me to get a good look at its main features. It was something like what my father had described, except it looked like my father had been a bit modest in describing it. The creature was hunched over, arms hanging limply to the ground, thin long fingers ending in long claws. The skin was covered with sores and cadaverous spots and had a grayish-bluish tint. I couldn't see its face or muzzle. I don't know what it was, because of the long hair hanging from its head. The only thing I could see was a huge mouth, topped with a huge number of needle-thin teeth. Of course, my first thought was that it was all a hoax, but that thought evaporated when I heard the stench that the creature emitted. It was something like the smell of rotting flesh along with blood, damp earth, and smoldering skin. Such special effects would not have been done for me. Unfortunately, as it turned out, I wasn't the only one who noticed the creature, but it noticed me as well. The creature stopped abruptly and sniffed, and then, as comically as possible, but still quickly enough, ran toward me. I don't know why, but I didn't feel any wild terror. It was all drowned out by adrenaline and a sense of danger. I couldn't get home in time. The bastard was getting closer and closer, and I thought of nothing better than to run to the old cowsheds. It was narrow and cramped enough, and I doubted that the bastard would be able to pursue me there. I successfully looped around the cowsheds for about 5 minutes until I tripped over some damn brick and fell headlong into a concrete block. I woke up on the street. My head hurt terribly. My face was covered with blood, and my leg hurt terribly. Gradually, the ability to think and feel returned, and slightly opening my eyes, I almost lost consciousness again, but this time from fear. The creature was dragging me, holding my leg, somewhere towards the outskirts of the village. A sharp flash of pain in the area of my head made me pass out again. I must have hit a rock. I had no strength to resist. I finally came to my senses in the cellar of a house next to an unexcavated grave. When I looked inside, I saw the creature. It was apparently resting after a night of hunting. Luckily, the hatch was open, and I made my way as quietly as possible to the exit. The only source of light in the basement was a pipe that led outside for ventilation, but I was not destined to escape without incident. Literally, near the stairs, something crunched under my foot, and when I picked up the strange source of the sound, I was horrified. It was a human bone. Looking closer, I realized that the whole floor was strewn with bones, and in the far corner there was the mummified body of a woman. I couldn't see anything else, and I didn't really want to. But the owner of the dwelling had apparently heard the crunching of bones, and there was a swarming in his grave. The creature was starting to come out. I flew up the stairs, but the creature was very fast, because as soon as I stepped away from the hatch, 2 long clawed paws immediately appeared and started fumbling around the hatch. Then there was an angry roar, and I ran forward again without waiting for the horror to continue. I had almost reached the exit when the creature caught up with me and clawed at my arm, shaking my head frantically from side to side, causing my arm to separate from my body. I howled in savage pain. I thrashed in a fit of pain, and by some miracle I hit the door. The door opened, and bright sunlight streamed into the room. The creature smoked, roared, and jumped back into the house. I crawled out of the house in pain and horror, and strangely enough, I lost consciousness. I came to my senses in the hospital, covered in bandages and stitches, with my father sitting next to me. I had never seen him cry. But now, in front of me was not that strong and stocky man, which I remembered all my life, and an elderly man who seemed to me to have aged for one day for 10 years. Long rehabilitation, treatment, and lifelong disability is what I got for my skepticism. But the greatest trauma remained in my soul, for my world was turned upside down in an instant. All my life I believed that there are no monsters, and all these silly, scary stories told only to tickle the nerves of especially gullible simpletons. But now I personally was a direct participant in one of these scary stories. As my father told me, he began to worry about not finding me at home in the morning and went to look for me, expecting me to go and check on my own skin. He went around the village until he reached the outskirts, where I was lying 3 meters from the entrance to the house, bleeding. I was taken to the hospital, and when they searched the house and found this something in the basement, a tanker of diesel fuel was immediately brought in. The cellar was filled in and boarded up. The mummified body was recognized as the owner of the house, the same grandmother Agafia, and the coffin belonged to her late husband. Apparently, the grandmother did not accept the loss, tried to do some sorcery, but failed, for which she paid the price. She wanted the villagers to correct her mistake, but the dead man was quicker. The house was doused and set on fire, after which they put concrete slabs on the place where the cellar was entered, thus sealing this wickedness in its grave forever.